welcome to the opening plenary session on this, the second day, and it's called The Now, Servicing the Modern Tall Building Occupant. I think it's fair to say in recent years that the Council has tried to redress the historical imbalance and the loudness of voices between those that design and construct tall buildings and those who actually use them. Back in 2017 at our Sydney conference, we did hear from a number of occupiers on their experiences, and I'm really pleased to say that the subject is taking a prominent position in this year's conference as well, because actually this is the whole point of creating tall buildings. It's for those who actually occupy them. So I'm really pleased to say that we've got 4 specialists in their respective fields who I will introduce now, and I'm really hoping they're in the right order. Yes, they are fantastic. So the first to my immediate left is Gamboa, who's a Senior Director of CBRE here in Chicago, and though his background is in civil and environmental engineering, the vast majority of his career has been in leading and managing corporate interior projects, not only with CBRE actually, but with his previous employer, Turner Construction. His role actually spans the full spectrum of occupier-focused work, from lease negotiation all the way through to actually the relocation of people, and often actually into tall buildings as well. And he leads a team of 40 PMs, I think it is, here in Chicago and beyond. He's probably far too modest to say I've found out that he was the recipient of CBRE's Rise Award in 2015, which I'm presuming recognises rising talent in the organisation, and in the same year won the Chicago Commercial Real Estate Award. So 2015 was obviously a really good year for you, Abe, but hopefully not the only one. Then we have Kirsten, who's Vice President of Development for EQ Office in Chicago. And for those who don't know, EQ Office is a real estate investment company founded over 40 years ago, now owned by the Blackstone Group, owns 80 properties around the States, about 40 million square feet. Kirsten has the rather significant responsibility, amongst other things, of overseeing the project and financial management of the $500 million redevelopment of Willis Tower. And some of you might have seen Willis Tower at our VIP reception on Monday, I think it was. And that's a project which includes 300,000 square feet of retail, dining and entertainment space and a new podium. So the reinvention of one of the most recognisable tall buildings in the world. And in the spare time, Kirsten is co-chair of the ULI Chicago Women's Leadership Institute, Chicago Loop Alliance board member. I could actually go on, and you've got a very long list of things that you do in your spare time. Then we have Tom Vining, who's based in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, president of Otis Americas, responsible for the growth and development of business across North and South America. Spends most of his time on a plane, I'm guessing. And he's been with the company for 3 decades and has held nearly every customer-facing role at Otis in that time. And his experience actually includes significant periods in Asia, so Korea, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and mainland China too. And he's an enthusiastic supporter of innovation and keeping Otis at the forefront of digital applications, no doubt putting to good use his degree in computer science and economics and his Harvard MBA as well. And to my far left, we have Nancy Yost, who's been Senior Vice President at Jones Lang LaSalle in the San Francisco Bay Area for almost 12 years. Nancy's actually an architect by training, spent some time with Bauer Interior Design and HOK in her past. But moved to the darker side of project management in 2006 when she started at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. Her forte is managing large, complex renovation and tenant improvement projects for a variety of clients, actually across quite a few sectors, I think. And just to give you a flavour of her projects, her recent projects include the conversion of the former Las Vegas City Hall into a new corporate HQ, renovation of the Mandarin Oriental Hotel in San Francisco, and a full interior refresh for Deloitte in San Jose. Also, it says here, a current workload includes 200,000 square foot tenant improvement across 11 floors of a confidential building for a confidential client, which sounds really intriguing, doesn't it? And she's also responsible for the development and implementation globally of JLL's flexible space program. So, I'm going to ask a few questions. It's a subject that I know that everyone is interested in. I'm going to try and mix it up a little bit this morning rather than wait to the end and leave 15 or 20 minutes for questions from the floor. I'm going to try and introduce questions a little bit earlier, maybe leave it 10 minutes or so. But if you've got something that they're saying gives you a burning need to ask a question or offer a thought, please do so, and I'll be on the lookout for people raising their hands, and we'll see how it goes. And I'm going to start with a really big question, which is, from your relative perspectives, what do you think tenants really like about tall buildings? And equally, what do they dislike? Abe, would you like to start with that one?
Sure. I would begin by stating the greatest benefit is having everyone under one roof, like a family. That's certainly a great benefit. Additionally, I noticed, I did take a look at the pictures on the website, the day one recap, and the first picture that was on the screen was the attendees enjoying the view from Willis Tower. Well, certainly that's what occupants enjoy as well. So that's a great benefit. And I would say in terms of the challenges as opposed to a dislike, the challenges certainly are the inflexibility. One of the themes I think we're going to hear about today quite often is adaptability and flexibility, and the fixed structure is a challenge as more and more occupants want that flexibility. I think Kirsten will talk a little bit about that as well.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Really excited to be here and really excited to be representing and speaking on behalf of Willis. I understand Stefan Katz from Gensler, hopefully some of you were able to join his presentation yesterday, where he really got to delve into a lot more about Willis than we'll be able to in this short time. But thank you for having me. As far as what people really enjoy about being in a tall building, certainly as a tenant and an employee in a tall building, I can speak from my own perspective as well as our greater tenant pool. I think, Abe, you hit it on the head that being in a tall building offers such a great scale and an opportunity for density to bring things into that building that we'll talk about in more detail about amenities, services, restaurants, kind of everything that someone might want to have for a day in the life of their experience. Because the work life and work days are blending more with technology that helps free up our time in certain ways, but then it also, we're chained to it a lot more than we used to be. So that starts blending some of those lines and creating spaces within tall buildings. We have the opportunity to have the density and the scale to justify building those types of spaces. And I think the challenge, which partnering with people like Otis and Tom here, the challenge is moving throughout the building. And I'll let Tom speak to that a little bit more clearly.
Tom, the first interaction that people have with a tall building after the reception desk is the elevators.
Exactly.
What do they value in that experience, and what frustrates them?
Right. Well, thank you, and good morning to everybody, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I mean, I was going to say, I hope everybody's like me. They like the elevator ride in the building the best of, yeah, I certainly get excited when I go to in tall buildings and get the opportunity. And but you know, I think it's important, obviously, to have a seamless experience, get you from door to door. And to me, the challenges are, is when buildings are repurposed, they're densified, and the elevators don't keep up with that. Investments aren't made in elevator systems to keep up with new building uses, and I'm sure we'll talk more later today about some of those challenges. But you know, I in general, I love elevators, and that's why I go to tall buildings.
There's no surprise there. Nancy.
So when I look at it, I think about you know, the tenants who are going into a tall building. Where's that located? It's located in a central business district, and you know, they are attracted to a tall building not because of its height or its spectacular views necessarily. It's because that's where they're going to find a strong and diverse workforce. I think the challenge in towers is mobility. And you know, if you look at a suburban, smaller type of building, and a campus situation, it's a lot easier for people within an organization to move around and see each other and go up and down the stairs. You know, I know we're going to talk later about, you know, security, for example. A lot of buildings in San Francisco, you cannot go between floors. So it makes it super challenging if you are a tenant on multiple floors.
Okay, so if you had to pick one requirement of a contemporary tall building occupant that's really changed compared to previous generations, no matter what the building type, what would it be?
Sure. Well, this crosses all tall buildings, is connectivity, Wi-Fi, cell phone connectivity. That's one that quickly has changed as our technology has changed. And that's one of the biggest drivers that occupants of any building are looking for. They're looking to take their phone call from the street into the building, up the elevator, and to their desk. And the ability to do that, if there are buildings that do have that offering, certainly they stand out. They are more attractive, they're more valuable to those occupants, whether it's, you know, multi-tenant housing or it's a corporate office building. The fact of the matter is people enjoy that convenience. The technology is a part of who we are now, and it's certainly a part of the next few generations, some of which it hadn't been in the past, and now it is.
Mm-hmm. Kirsten?
I think that technology certainly is a big driver, and that will continue to be a big driver as far as requirements going forward. But I want to touch on something a little bit different, which is really looking at the decision-making process for real estate and how that's changed. And I think the requirement now that didn't used to be a requirement historically was that business leaders are not only looking at the physical space and how it can serve their business needs, they're looking at using that space as a tool for how they can attract, retain, and inspire their talent. We're in such a different space right now where there's such an aggressive war for talent, and it's something we'll talk about when we talk more about amenities as well. But they're really looking to landlords and to building owners to help them create a platform that they can use as a recruitment tool. One of our new training technology tenants at Willis, I heard from a friend of mine who was being recruited by this company that they were moving to Willis, and that was one of the very first things that they told him in that conversation was, we're moving to Willis Tower, where Blackstone and EQ have launched this major redevelopment, where not only are you going to have these incredible amenities throughout the building, you're also going to have this brand new dining and entertainment space at the base of the building that brings a complete new neighborhood to the base of Willis. So I think having business leaders have that lens where it's not just the CFO and the CEO making those decisions, where the location search was really done on a matrix and a lot of quantitative measures. That's still a big part of it, but the other part of it that's driving a lot more of the conversations we're hearing is feedback and input from that company's people and culture team, their HR team, as to what do our employees want, what do they need, and how that has changed the search process. So what we're trying to do as building owners, and what I think we all who are owners and developers have the opportunity to do, is to help our tenants create those spaces that can attract, retain, and inspire their talent.
Tom, Abe used the word connectivity, and obviously you've got a very, very large part to play in that. How's it changed from your perspective?
Right. So a couple things. I think what we're seeing is a lot of diversification in buildings, diversification in tenants, diversification in needs. And so where I see connectivity really helping is both personalization and seamlessness of activity in a building. And I'll give a couple of examples. I was in San Francisco and was in a building that had a tenant that had cryptocurrency. And that tenant did not want to be in the elevator with any other company from a security, from a privacy standpoint. And in the old days, and this building just happened to be just modernized, they had to block out elevators for that tenant. It would affect service. And in today's environment, you can do all that virtually and really seamlessly without a lot of effect on other tenants. So I think what we're seeing is a lot of requirements for personalizing solutions, whether that be at the building level, whether that be at the tenant level, or whether that be at the individual level. And so a number of different solutions, both whether it be using, we have a situation in Singapore where we're integrating with a building app and people's personal apps, a very diversified building where we can personalize solutions and informations to individuals throughout the building. So I think that integration and the connectivity is very important to our and elevator companies' overall solutions.
Nancy, anything else?
So, I think what's different is, I agree with, the technology and the amenities. We're really now trying to create neighborhoods within buildings, both internally and externally, and having access to public space is becoming increasingly important. So that's really how I see them changing along with the technology.
So creating neighbourhoods, and this is something, Kirsten, you mentioned in terms of creating a community. How difficult is it to manage a building, given that? And I guess part of that is creating shared amenities as well, as you mentioned.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, that certainly is part of our redevelopment strategy is how do you take this incredible architectural icon, this building that was built as an ode to the corporation, for the Sears Corporation, and how do you make that accessible to the individual employee, and how do you make people today, where we are so focused on the employee's individual experience, how do you help them connect with each other, and how do you make that processional, that entry, that welcoming into their workplace something that is a welcoming experience? And part of that is creating a sense of community, and I think that can be achieved in a couple of ways. One is from the traditional architecture and design. We worked with Gensler on creating a new experience at the base of the building so that the architecture and the design of the portal entries that we have, for several of you who went there, you would have walked through them yesterday. When you come up through that entry experience, you then are not met immediately with a stark security desk that can often feel very foreboding and off-putting. We've created more of a lounge and hospitality type feel in the lobby so that you come in, you see this beautiful piece of artwork. There's a lobby lounge to the side where you see people in small groups kind of talking and connecting with each other. And then the welcome desk, not necessarily the security desk, the welcome desk is off to the side. So we create that community space in the physical place at the lobby entry level. And then what we've done, to Nancy's point, is throughout the building, because it is such the scale of the building is so incredible. We've got 15,000 employees on a daily basis, and we have people who are taking low shuttle elevators, high shuttle elevators, and then having to transfer to their local elevators. And I'm sure Tom can get into this more as well. But what we really tried to do is create these neighborhoods and these communities throughout the building so that when you are taking that shuttle to transfer to your local elevator, that you have a space while you're doing that transfer where you can connect with other people in the building, connect with your other coworkers. So these amenity spaces we built them on the transfer floors. And we built them to create kind of that third space. So people talk about the blending of the live, work, and play, and we talked about that with technology really plays a role in that, where you're not chained to your desk, to your desktop computer. You can take that laptop, you can have a video conference, you can go sit in the cafe and the lounge and have a small group meeting there, have an interview there, have your year-end performance appraisals over a glass of wine or a coffee. It's a much better way to create that sense of community. So that's something that we've done from the physical side of creating a community, but then there's also the programming side of it that I think is really critical to create that kind of tissue that connects all of the tenants together. I know we'll talk more about experiences and amenities a little bit later.
Tom, as you were mentioned there, how does it's obviously a great impact on the elevators in the building, and how does the management of the building impact on what you're providing?
I'm sorry,
Tom,
the management.
sorry.
Tom.
So I think Willis Tower is actually a great example of repurposing a building, and we're doing a full modernization. And there is a lot of change and change management that is involved with working with tenants. And we worked a lot on user interface. The building had a requirement, which I think is the trend is to do the user interface changes up front. And this modernization is going to be a 3-4 year project. But the desire was to do the user interface piece up front because tenants are demanding the change, they're repurposing the building. And so, frankly, Willis Tower has done a great job in how they communicate with tenants, how they change behavior, because as elevators, and we put on a destination system there, tenants had to learn how to use that system. And so it is a lot about what we all do, I think, in our companies is when we put in change, communication, over-communicating is very important, and really the team at Willis did a great job on that.
And what about other technology rollouts? What are tenants doing, and how are they being managed so that operations are impacted in a minimal way? Maybe Nancy, I'll ask you that question.
About technology?
Technology, yeah.
I don't have a good answer for that one.
I know Abe does.
There we go.
The reason it's challenging to answer, ideally in a situation where the technology is integrated as a part of the initial building construction. That always isn't the case, as we have at Willis Tower, where they're renovating. And in that instance, again, representing from an occupier standpoint, it's piecemeal as the occupier moves into that new building. Now, again, if you're already living in the space, that's where you don't have a good answer. That's the challenge, is it's during off hours and it's during the weekends. But ultimately, it's necessary. And the change management, the communication you discussed, allows for the people to accept a little inconvenience, knowing that around the corner, they're going to have the convenience they're looking for, whether it's technology-driven or a community-based effort. It's around the corner.
Yeah, so actually, I did talk with one of my investor clients about technology and rolling out new technology in buildings. And what she said to me was, it really needs to be old school. You need to actually talk to people, talk about what you're doing, and then as you roll it out, you need to have someone available that can help them troubleshoot. It's, just sending an email out isn't really going to work.
So you mentioned security earlier, Nancy, and increasingly we're getting new pieces of software for security and mobility and destination management. How's that reconciled with people's privacy requirements?
And that's
Tom, you go.
Okay. I think nowadays that's a huge issue. I mean, we've gone from interfacing with access control systems to how to integrate with iPhones and sort of military grade security that you need to interface with iPhones, to now technologies like facial recognition. And I think as you look around the globe, requirements and acceptance are vastly different. So if you take Asia and China, I mean, it's happening. It's actively going forward, faster than we can imagine. If you take the U.S., it's just starting. I was in the Delta flying internationally out of Atlanta 2 weeks ago, and they use facial recognition instead of checking my passport to let me board the airplane. So it is coming. I think we're going to see more facial recognition technology in the U.S. And then you sort of take the extreme, and those of you from Europe know that I think the sort of reluctance, some of the government regulations, I think it's going to be a much longer time if it happens in Europe, some new technologies. But I think it all comes down to what drives that security. And I think what's going to drive it and what's going to move it forward for all of us is it going to enable us to be seamless? Is there a benefit to the end user? I think the answer to that is yes, there is a benefit to the end user in how they how they deal with buildings, how they move through buildings. And so we're going to have to balance sort of the desires of a system with privacy concerns, both public and private. And I think that we're going to have to come up with multiple solutions, all of us, because it's going to be different depending on where you are in the world and actually even where you are within the North America. So,
Kirsten, is this a consideration, Willis? Or
Well, security, of course, at Willis will always be top of mind and of utmost importance. We have instituted a couple of new security measures with the redevelopment. We've put in new security turnstiles, and as part of that, there's an option for tenants to opt into a new MorphoWave system. So we piloted several different types of security systems with our team, and we felt that where the technology is right now, that the MorphoWave was the most reliable for what we needed. So I don't know what our adoption rate is to date, but there was a lot of discussion early on with some of our largest tenants, United certainly being the largest. They are about a third of our building. Having pre-conversations with them and understanding what their potential privacy concerns are, and really getting out in front of that with their internal legal counsel, with their internal people and culture teams, to really get that message out to people who were concerned that, oh, I don't want my fingerprints in the system and all of that. So that's not how this works. There is more privacy associated with it. And I think that it provides a level of convenience for people that they're really excited about, that they don't have to go digging for their ID when it's cold outside. They're holding a coffee, they're doing all this stuff. It's just, I can just walk you right in, here's my hand. So there is a concern there, but we worked really hard on the upfront communication piece with the tenants to allay any of those privacy fears.
So as I said at the beginning, I'm keen to get thoughts and questions from the floor throughout the discussion. Difficult questions encouraged. We don't mind difficult questions, do we? Or whatever. So if you do have a burning, and we do have one. Thank you, sir. If you could just like to state your name and clear question. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Steve Strauss with Glumac, a Tetra Tech company. Great presentations. We're seeing a dramatic increase in density, and I'm wondering if you're seeing the same thing, and how's that affecting buildings, and how are you going to maintain profits with so many more people using your facilities?
Yeah. So companies are putting more people in less space in offices. How's that impacting, Abe?
Well, we're certainly seeing a challenge in the building infrastructure, whether it's the mechanical componentry that was typical on a floor of certain size. We're also seeing that in the amount of facilities that are available, the quantity of restrooms. And there's certainly a pressure on that. What has helped is destination, smart elevators. That certainly allows for some more efficiencies. And to address your question around the financial portion of it, the reality is the rents are increasing for occupants. And rightfully so, there is an alignment with the amenities that come with those buildings with the higher rent, whether it's the capability of that mechanical system to handle higher density, the flexibility of the space that offers that option to the occupiers, as well as just the core and shell infrastructure in terms of what it can handle. Certain quantities you can expand without having to change the entire building because it's already ahead of its time.
Kirsten, are you seeing densification of your space?
Sure. One of the advantages of Willis with the different types of floor plates we have, because as I'm sure you are all very familiar, the 9-tube structure the tubes drop off as you progress up the building. So we have these really large floor plates on the lower third of the building. So that allows for large open space tenants who tend to have a more dense workforce in those places. And United's on those floors, and they're working on their restack as part of their renewal. And there are a lot of discussions around what's that right level of density for that tenant. And for us as landlord and building owner, and putting my my retail and restaurant leasing hat on, density really has some great benefits for the other users in the building. So as we're courting and curating our new, what we're calling the catalog space at the building, the new 300,000 square feet that you mentioned before, Steve, that's a completely new footprint that extends the base of the building south of where it currently sits, and it's built there today. You can see it if you haven't already. And it's primarily food and beverage, some specialty retail. And as we're talking to those types of tenants, hearing that there are 15,000 people in the building and that there's additional density coming as new people re-up their leases and look to add more density, that's music to their ears, because that just means more people, more shoppers, more eaters, and that's a true benefit from that perspective. It does tax certainly the existing building systems, and with the older infrastructure that we're working on redeveloping at Willis, that is a necessity. But the increased efficiency from destination dispatch for people moving throughout the building has been absolutely critical in making that transition happen.
Tom, getting more people in, up and down the building.
Right.
Challenge.
And certainly destination's a big part of that. But I'd also say that we're going to need to keep moving the technology forward, and whether that be artificial intelligence, whether that be use of video. There are a number of additional technologies that will help with efficiency, because the densification continues. I mean, we're seeing buildings that were designed for law firms now being designed for tech firms. And frankly, tech companies, I mean, they're worried about seconds and tenths of seconds of response time and delivery time of employees to where they're going, because they're concerned about productivity. You see that sort of same thing with investment banks. And so, the world's changing, the demands are changing. We're even seeing, and I'm sure some of you are, with tech clients, allowing employees to bring dogs onto elevators. And that completely changes the old way of thinking of how you dispatch elevators. It used to be, you'd use weight in the elevator, and that would tell you that an elevator's full and would tell you not to stop on floors. Now it's changed where you've got a dog taking up probably the space of 2 or 3 people in an elevator, and those old concepts of when to stop, not stop on an elevator floor are now changing, and it's changing towards smarter technology to use to control elevator systems.
And Nancy, your flexible workspace program obviously is there to address these issues.
Well, I think you're always going to have problems with infrastructure, restrooms, paths of travel when you pack a lot of people into a space. What I found, obviously, over the last 10 years is that the number of square feet per person used in a CRE's calculation has gone down and down and down. But it seems to have leveled off, and I want to say around 150 square feet per person. The only people that we see that are going lower than that are oftentimes the co-working companies. But what I'm finding is, even though people are saying, oh, we're down to 125 square feet per person, not every desk is filled. I mean, you still walk around and there is at least 20 to 30% of those work areas that no one is utilizing at all. So.
Okay. Any more questions or thoughts?
Yeah,
yes, over the...
So I had exactly this question. I was talking to someone, this is George Leventis from Langen, and we have been, as a company, looking at this, how many square feet per person. I was talking to a co-working high-level executive, I'm not going to say the firm, but they were talking about going down to some ridiculous amount of 60 or even below square feet per person. And the whole premise was the hoteling and the fact that they don't assign desks to people. So you arrive, you go find a desk, you go work. How, does anybody know the accuracy of those numbers? Because if you are off, you have a big problem in your hands. Anybody has any idea how these things are actually evolving?
So do occupiers actually monitor how they're using their space and the accuracy of the density that's actually needed?
I would say certainly they do measure that because that's a part of their efficiency. At the end of the day, it's a big driver of their financial statement because it plays into the rent that they pay for the amount of space. Nancy mentioned a metric that should be discussed as a part of density is utilization. What we are finding, whether it's in a co-working office or a typical law firm that's traditionally perimeter offices, whatever the case may be, it's the utilization of the space that you are paying for. That's the big driver. That's whether you allow for the amount of seats. I mean, as an example, here in this room, I've got 6 seats right here in front that aren't necessarily utilized. So the fact of the matter is, while the room can allow for a certain amount of people, it's not always utilized to that effect. Within our own offices at CBRE, we have seen an increase in utilization by going to a free address, a more dense space. And we've seen the benefit of that. But we've seen the utilization still remain under 85%. So the fact of the matter is, unless we call an all-staff meeting, not all seats are utilized. And that's the balance that allows for a much more dense space without overtaxing the infrastructure.
And to that end, to jump onto that, Abe, I think that another advantage in the tall building space that we have is creating value for our tenants by putting in spaces that allow them to have that higher density, so they don't have to use a good portion of their usable space. They don't have to set that aside for the quarterly board meeting to fit 20 to 30 people when that could fit 20 workstations. So by providing conferencing, large event spaces within the building footprint, we're partnering with Convene, who's one of our new tenants. They're starting their build out now. They'll be on the 3rd floor at Willis. That was a big conversation point when we were renegotiating with United, and they were trying to think about how they best utilize and get the most efficiency out of their space. And that was one of our selling points to them, was the fact that you can get more employees, you can get more usable space, you can get more, not just of the workstations, but what people really are asking for, which are those small collaboration rooms. They really wanted to have more of those small collaboration spaces, and they're able to now do that as part of their redesign process because they don't have to have as much of their square footage requirement earmarked for those large conference rooms that they just don't utilize that often.
Nancy?
So she mentioned earlier, that they've created these amenity spaces on your transfer floors, and that people go there, they work there. It's third space, and people don't work just in their office. Yeah. They work everywhere. They work from home one day, they work from a coffee shop, they'll work from, an amenity space, a lounge. You can work anywhere. So I think that even though, we've said X number of seats per square foot, again, we're just not seeing them utilized because there's so many options, and people need different options to work during the day. Different workspace.
I have a question, if I could, of some of my co-panelists.
Yeah, go for it.
Probably Abe and Nancy. Tom, I'm not sure if you would know much about this, but you asked about, the gentleman over here asked about technologies, about measuring utilization. I'm curious, I don't know from my own perspective or our tenants if people are using that, but I was at a recent ULI conference, and there was a whole discussion about different types of technologies that that people are starting to use. Are you seeing many of your clients and tenants asking about those technologies, actively utilizing them, and then changing their space planning as a result?
Sure. I'll answer
Yeah,
that.
we are seeing them looking for that type of utilization information. The key is we need to make sure that it's It's not facial recognition. It's actually just
Right.
acknowledging that it's a body or it's a dog, that's in that room. So yeah, they definitely are asking for it. Again, the whole personal security about your personal information is really important. Occupancy sensors,
Yeah.
and you can be harvesting that data and know how often your 8-person conference room is being used, and you can figure out how many people are in there.
And I'm going to add, it is actually a question I can answer, because we're getting a lot of requests for elevator data and usage to, people going to floors, how many people, what days of the week. And so certainly the amount of elevator usage dictates how the building is being used. And so it is becoming a greater requirement to provide some detailed data on elevator usage.
No, David Scott had his hand up.
Hi, David Scott, Lang O'Rourke. Around the world, a lot of architects, engineers, and businesses have declared a climate emergency. And so my question for you is, do you think tenants care about carbon? And what are developers doing about it now and in the future? And how much more is convenience more important than sort of sustainability? Because you can be more sustainable by raising temperatures on sunny days, cooling them on cool days, etc. So I'd really be interested in your opinions on that.
Do tenants care about carbon? Do they know what they want in sustainability terms, and do developers know what tenants want?
I'll speak
Abe.
for the occupants. Without question, they still do care. We've seen projects, certainly across the country and more so across the globe, where that is important. Here locally, we have a client who's asking to build the world's most sustainable building. Now, granted, it's a small building at 8 stories tall, as opposed to the tall buildings, but the intent is certainly still there. The question as to what systems can we implement that can be more efficient, sustainable, better use of fuels, use of solar power. That's a study that 5-6 years ago was a question asked occasionally to now it's asked regularly. What can we do? And it's certainly one of the questionnaires that one of the questions that are on the questionnaires that occupants send over to the landlords and to the big building developers. What are you doing that's going to support our initiatives? So I would say that hasn't gone away. It may not be promoted as much as it was in the past, but it's certainly still important.
Kirsten, do you agree?
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's a critical part of every conversation that we have with our tenants. And that's why we really prioritize as part of the redevelopment and the reinvestment in some of the critical building systems, including elevators, including the new space that we're building out in the lobbies and amenities, but also in more lighting efficiency. I can't tell you the number of plumbing fixtures we've replaced in the building, but all of that we were able to achieve LEED Gold for existing buildings last year, and that's a huge accomplishment for such a, well, thank you. Thank you, Steve. It's a huge accomplishment for a building like Willis in particular. But the other thing that I just want to touch on is that what we're hearing from tenants, and certainly that's kind of our core at EQ office, is focusing not just on sustainability or environmental factors, but the broader initiatives around ESG, environmental, social, and governance. So we're really looking at that as a company and starting to work better, more deeply with our tenants who are focused on ESG initiatives. So we've always had some philanthropic efforts at the building, and we're now engaging more with our tenants on those initiatives and kind of co-creating that philanthropy as a tenant amenity, because a lot of tenants are launching these ESG initiatives, and they're coming to us and saying, What can we do? And again, because of the density and the scale that we have in the building, we're able to create that programming platform for them. This Sunday, we're doing a sky rise, so if anyone wants to climb to the top of Willis Tower, pony up and donate some money, and you can do it. I did it last year. That was enough for me. But we're going to raise $1 million for the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, formerly the Rehab Institute of Chicago. So we're able to do those things. So we are having tenants who critically important. The environment continues to be critically important. But ESG and broader social initiatives and philanthropic initiatives are much more the type of conversation we're having these days.
Nancy, do tenants care about carbon? Do they increasingly care about carbon?
Absolutely. In my conversations with an investor client of mine, he indicated that they are only looking at buildings that are LEED certified, and they are also looking at buildings that also have gone through WELL certification. One of the things that they found interesting is that several years ago, tenants would push back on having to pay for the recertification for LEED. Now it's not even a question. It's expected.
Okay. Can I just go, because this person over here has had his hand up for longer. Sorry, Anthony. I'll come to you next. Yep.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Anton Davies with RWDI. Not too long ago, I was on the 14th floor of a very tall building in downtown Toronto, and there was a fire drill called. And so, obviously, walking down through this very narrow corridor, we were going so slowly, even as old as I am, it was not a problem. And I figured I'd have been toast if it was a real fire. So what's happening now with the densification of all these older towers? Is there a serious consideration of the fire evacuation systems?
Who would like to answer that one?
I'm certainly no security and emergency preparedness expert, but I can say that our head of security and our team are hyper vigilant on tenant communication. We talked about it before in a more proactive way, that the number, the frequency, the comprehensiveness of tenant preparedness and emergency training, all different types of training. We do it frequently, and especially because there are several people who, as you mentioned, Nancy, work from home. They're not in the office all the time, so the typical, once a year you do the fire drill. We do it more frequently than that. We often have tenants who have requested more frequent and more in-depth trainings and preparedness activities and exercises. So we are all for the more we can communicate, the better, so that everyone can be better prepared.
Tom, are we using elevators to evacuate? Yeah.
Not in existing buildings, but in future buildings, using occupant evacuation systems that are now becoming more prevalent in building designs. And so we are seeing where and I think most of the elevator companies have systems that allow for the use of elevators in newer buildings integrated with fire alarm systems. So.
Sorry, Abe, did you have something?
I would simply add that we are seeing some modifications. I know CBRE has implemented, we have an app that we utilize to communicate, so we understand what the emergency is, if and where, and it doesn't matter. The app follows us, so if I traveled to Montreal or Toronto or Singapore, it knows where I'm at and advises of emergencies in that area. But we are seeing, from a practical standpoint, one of the more recent towers that is about to begin breaking ground in this coming year here in 2020, we represented their anchor tenant, and they did understand the densification of their building based on the square footage and based on this tech group that will be occupying. And so they are offering wider stairwells. So as Tom mentioned, while currently elevators are not used as an evacuation system, the stairwells are. And in an effort to avoid that cramped stairwell, they are widening those for greater densities,
Anthony.
Hi, Anthony Wood, CTBUH. I wonder whether the panel, and maybe Kirsten in particular, could talk a little bit about the tenant connection to the brand of the building and the title of the building, yeah? Because it's still a sore point in Chicago that Sears is Willis. And, you know, in a multi-tenant building, I think Willis took like 8, Willis are a UK insurance company, you know, and they took maybe 10 floors in the building out of a 100-story building, you know, and they got the naming rights to the building. And recently, the John Hancock, is now 875 North Michigan. You know, it's just another number of Michigan. And I think it's an important point because this is not just and okay, those are defunct brands now, largely, but still, the brand has surpassed the company and become part of the social iconography of the city, and actually an international iconography. And I wonder, what is the rationale of, you know, of how do tenants respond to that?
We were
Funny.
chatting beforehand.
What
weren't we?
did I say?
Kirsten said someone's going to ask that question.
I called it. I said, I guarantee you there will be a question about the name. There always is. I joke, and I shared with these guys. I mean, I'm born and bred Chicagoan, love this town. I'm the biggest booster ever. And my friends and family, when I took this role and this job with EQ Office and working on the Willis Tower redevelopment, they said, you know, ugh, can't believe it. It's always Sears Tower. How could you ever call it Willis? I said, well, with all due respect, this is who I'm working for now. It is Willis Tower to me. It can always stay Sears Tower to you. It is Willis Tower to me, and it is to our tenants. So we can agree to disagree. So for all of you out there, I respect that you may want to call it Sears Tower, especially the architects in the audience. But it is Willis Tower to us, certainly. Willis Towers Watson is a long-term partner and tenant in the building, so that was a part of their lease deal and part of the economics of that deal that the prior ownership had made. So, you know, we obviously still honor that agreement and that partnership. As far as how tenants connect with the building, that's really one of the things that we're trying to do with the redevelopment, is finding other ways for tenants to connect with the building that's not just associated with the name, but that's associated with the space and the community and the experience that we're creating in the building. One of the ways that we have created is to keep that tie and that historical nod to Sears, because they are the ones who took this amazing leap and built this architectural icon, is we want to honor that connection and partnership to Sears. So we had a lot of discussions about, with the new footprint that we're adding to the base of the building, how can we create that tie and that connection, especially for Chicagoans who are so proud of that legacy. And so that's why we're calling the new 300,000 square feet of space, this new neighborhood we're building at the base of the building, we're calling it Catalog, as a nod to the Sears Corporation. You know, the building is the birthplace of the catalog, the original retail disruptor. And we really wanted to honor that. So not only is there that name recognition, but it's also a catalog that creates a day in the life. You can, you know, a catalog of experiences are provided for our tenants. So that's the story that we are working with, connecting with our tenants on, and that's really resonating with them. It's not necessarily the connection to the name of the building, but the spaces and the experiences and the community that they get within the building.
Does that soothe your emotional attachment to the name? Didn't think it would. Yes, question over there.
Okay, I'm Lionel Brunner at IBMC, and my question is mainly for Tom. Over the past 100 years, the basic elevator system with one car moving in one shaft hasn't really changed. During the conference, we've heard about many multiple cars in one shaft, or having cars moving sideways without cables. And as developers, we're developing new projects. We haven't really gotten guidelines from elevator companies how to plan buildings today will allow in 15, 20 years to adapt them to the new systems, which will be a very big boost to density.
So I guess there's two parts to that. Elevator technology is moving on fairly quickly.
Right.
Multiple cars in shafts, possibility of moving horizontally as well as vertically. Right. But also, how do you design a building to cope with that flexibility of the future?
Yeah. So I guess I would say different, different opinions on where the future, where the immediate future, and where the long-term future. And certainly, we have patents on, technology for, whether that be, multiple elevators or other technology. But I think our feeling is that there's a long way to go with artificial intelligence, the electrical versus the mechanical progress of elevators. And so I think there's still a long runway from a productivity, utilization of elevators given sort of the cost and the efficiency of elevators. So, we're making a lot of investment into dispatching and systems, and I'll give you an example of one of the problems we're trying to solve. One of the problems we're trying to solve right now is banks of elevators, and the restrictions that puts on buildings, whether that be one tenant that wants to go into different banks, or having to do that transfer. And so we now have 2 buildings on the West Coast that are called Supergroup. And so it's synchronous dispatching. You have elevators that serve all floors, and they can, via software, transfer back and forth between different groups of elevators and solve some of those problems of, tenants being in different banks, shifting demands between different areas in the building. So I think that's sort of the immediate is, I think we'll get there with other technology, but I think the sort of near mid future is really in that artificial intelligence, dispatching, and how to serve different parts of the building. So yes, at some point the basic structure will change, but I don't think it's here yet from a design of the building yet. That's my opinion, and I'm sure there's lots of competing opinions on that.
I'm going to wind at that question because buildings need to, from a sustainability perspective, need to last longer and therefore be flexible to adapt to different uses perhaps in the future. And creating that flexibility costs money. Does that mean that the buildings themselves have to become simpler in order to allow the investment in more complex uses or for future adaptations to different uses?
Who's that question to?
Well, you're all looking at me blankly, so I'm going to ask.
We're all looking, we all see you looking at, looks like you're looking at each of us, so.
Abe.
Well, I'll speak to the comment, which is a great question, by the way, with respect to the buildings becoming more simple to become more adaptable. I think we're seeing that certainly across the United States. Is this simple retail building, the shopping malls, they are being repurposed to be closer distribution centers and converted to warehouse. And vice versa. Most recently, down in Texas, we were working on a project where the tenant is looking to build a flexible office space in what used to be a warehouse. So it does bode to your comment about that becoming more successful in terms of adapting the use. Now, certainly the challenge is with the tall buildings, the reason why we're here. That's a little different because tall buildings by nature are not simple. So what we are going to have to utilize, and I hadn't really thought, thinking about modern day, I hadn't thought about the use of AI, but the reality is to prepare for that, Tom, I would agree with you, is we do need to rely on our technology to push those buildings transformations forward as opposed to the architectural design and componentry. That's certainly a part of it, it's integral, but I think the technology is going to take us further.
Question over there.
Hi, I'm Sandeep. I'm an architect from Bombay, India. This question is about changing trend in occupants' demand. So the tall buildings are expensive and the occupants wants to maximize their benefit. And what we are observing that many of the office people are asking for working in 2.5 shifts. that means they want to work over a night also. So you already have 15,000 employees coming in your premises, and they want to work in 2.5 shifts. That increases the pressure on the vertical transmission, also on several resources that you need to give it to your tenants. So the question is, do you observe the similar trend happening over here? And how would you sustain this kind of a changing work culture in a near future?
So our tall buildings becoming 24-hour buildings. And how do you manage that? Nancy, do you want to kick off with that one? Or Kirsten?
So I spent the last 3 years working at Post-Montgomery Center for the investor, and that is a 24-hour building. You know, I guess maybe the question has to do with the HVAC running 24 hours. They certainly have that capability, but there weren't that many tenants in that building that wanted or needed 24-hour service.
Kirsten?
We have, United has their command center in our building, so they have obvious needs for 24 hours for that space as well as some of the other spaces, and they have shift work throughout the building. So we work with them on managing the HVAC needs for those spaces throughout the 24-hour period. We have one of our 3 entrances at the building is designated as a 24-hour entrance, but it's something in terms of flexibility and adaptability we were talking about, that how people use the space will continue to change, and as we're opening up this new catalog space, we're iteratively thinking through how we think about operating hours for the base of the building before you can get into the secure part of the tower, as well as the 24-hour needs of some of those office tenants, and making sure that we also have amenities for those 24-hour shift workers, that we've got food that is available for them for that time frame. So I'm not saying, from a trend perspective, we're not seeing new tenants coming into the building who have that type of the 2.5 shifts, but we do have it with an existing tenant, and we are certainly seeing many of our legal tenants, trading tenants, and firms who are there quite late. And who might also get off of work quite early. So we're thinking about, from an amenity and a service perspective, how we can meet their needs from that perspective, because we're certainly meeting them already from an HVAC, but how do we make that experience better for them? So one thing I'll mention on one of our amenity floors we've branded all of our amenity floors as different neighborhoods throughout the building. So we have 2 different sets of transfer floors where the elevators transfer from shuttle to local. And those are neighborhoods. One is kind of our Fulton Market, West Loop neighborhood. So think about that from a look and a feel perspective. And that's where we have our bar and our cafe. And then we have an upper, as well as our 30,000 square foot fabulous gym. And then on our upper set of transfer floors, we have a slightly refined neighborhood up there. And that caters more to the private wealth management and law firms who have the spaces on the high-rise of the building, and that's called Altitude. And when we were thinking about the programming of those spaces, we had a big discussion internally about what was the appropriate hour, or what were the appropriate operating hours for that bar. You're creating a bar in the middle of your office building. How do you appropriately set what that parameter should be? So we all thought 4 o'clock was probably an appropriate time for the bar to open, so it's open 4 to 8. Then, by popular tenant demand, we have now opened the bar 2 hours earlier, because there are people who have shift work and who get off at different times and who have different working hours and days, that they were missing out on it. And so we said, okay, so we're now open at 2 o'clock. So you're all welcome to come by for an early cocktail at Willis at Tower House someday.
I'll see you too.
Thank you.
Yeah, perfect.
We have a question over there.
Hi, I'm Katrina Fernandez from Adrian Smith Gordon Gill Architecture. Are tenants looking at architecture? Are they caring how the buildings look when they're looking for a building? Or when you're looking to develop a building, is that something that you're seeing? Does it add value to your product, or really is it all about what's inside?
As a cost consultant, I love that question. Do tenants value architecture?
I'll speak to, you can speak to maybe what you're doing to address it, but the answer is yes. In some cases.
Qualified, yeah.
It's a yes. There is certainly that is the case, but financially there's a larger influencer, and it is the finances. But the reality is it speaks to the brand, the name of the building. There's still a sense of pride of being in said building, whatever the case may be. I would agree with you, being able to state that, oh, I'm in the building with the catalog space. Certainly around Chicagoland area, you're well aware of that. In Dallas, in Miami, there are iconic buildings, and that still drives tenants to want to be there. You still want to have that address. Whether you like the change to 875 North Michigan, still being there in the John Hancock building is still iconic.
Yeah.
So they do care. Admittedly, it's not the strongest driver. That's all.
I suspect you agree with that.
I mean, in San Francisco, I feel like it's different. If they can find a grungy old warehouse to work in, that's perfect. They're taking floors in high-rise towers, and they're just like, no, we want to see all of the structure up there. We don't, And initially, owners of those towers were very reluctant because they didn't want that kind of grungy look. But they're all doing it now, and we've got polished concrete in all of our towers on the floors. So I think it varies. I don't think it's as important. It's more important to people in the Bay Area. What are the amenities? Who's around me? What are the amenities? Where's the restaurants? Can someone pick up my dry cleaning? That sort of thing. That's what's important. Make my life easy.
Okay. There's a question there.
Hi, good morning. I'm Caroline Finland Harding, WSP, and I'm out of San Francisco. And we've had a power outage at my house for the last few days. So I know resiliency has been a hot topic maybe a few years ago, but I haven't really heard conversations about resiliency and whether tenants are expecting or asking for anything different in their buildings. I wonder if you could speak to that.
Okay. Do tenants want their buildings to be more resilient? Has that changed?
More resilient? Well, I think there's a big topic in the past year that's gone around San Francisco. We have a lot of towers that were built in the late 70s through the 80s and the 90s. And what is everyone worried about? Earthquakes. And are those buildings safe? And there was an article that came out in the local paper in which someone questioned specifically 30 buildings, whether or not they had the structural integrity. And that's been a real nightmare for all of those owners, trying to prove that yes, in fact, we meet current code. The welds are fine, but it's an ongoing concern. I feel your pain in terms of not having power. My power was out for 3 days, so people have a lot of power envy that I'm here and able to take a shower, so that's good. I think that's probably the biggest concern that people have been talking about to me.
Thank you. We have a question over on the right-hand side.
Hi, Michael Munoz, Van Dusen Associates. We're seeing a trend where developers are letting the design of a building be led by the need to sign up an anchor tenant. And sometimes their design criteria is above and beyond what you would call industry standard. I'm specifically talking about elevators, but I think it goes to all trades. And at what point does a building design for the life of the building versus signing up the first 10 years?
Okay, so major anchor tenant driving the specification of the building. Abe?
Sure. I'd say absolutely they should. Again, representing tenants for the large majority of my career. But we have seen it, and in those instances where the occupier's demand influences the developer's product, it has to do more so with a longer-term commitment. So we're going beyond a 10-year lease commitment. It may be a 15 or 20-year. It's a real commitment. And the reality is, again, the financial driver around you make the bet on today as opposed to what could be. Because what could be is another building creating this great space and taking that anchor tenant away. So the fact of the matter is, certainly the developers are leaning more towards catering. And this speaks to, we joked about earlier backstage, about the adaptability and flexibility. At the end of the day, our clients, the occupiers, the tenants of these buildings, have to be adaptable to their clients' needs. Well, in order for that to occur, they need a space that's adaptable. In order for that to occur, that's where ownership, developers, tall building owners need to provide that flexibility. So I think it all rolls downhill, and it's simply a part of how we're providing that experience to our customers.
Tom, have you seen major tenants coming in and changing your elevator design?
I think there is a trend to get us involved a lot earlier with major tenants in the design of buildings. And so, and I certainly encourage that because people are looking for tailored solutions. Again, a lot of that is sort of software, how things are dispatched. But we do see that demand driven, and we're involved much earlier in projects now than we were in the past.
What about the management of tall buildings? And we're seeing changing consumer habits, storage space for Amazon deliveries, consolidation centers to bring all deliveries into one place. Are you seeing that changing dramatically?
I'd like to start with Kirsten. You're living it right now.
Oh, well, from consumer habits, it's hard to tell exactly. I mean, in the building, when we think about Amazon deliveries and things of that nature, we have, because of the scale of the building, because of the security needs that we have, we certainly don't allow packages and messengers and all of that, whether it be personal or business deliveries to be coming up through the building. All of that is delivered through a consolidated shared services messenger center. And then we have the in-house messengers who shuttle up to the building tenants. But what we are seeing now, I mean, we've just started launching our Willis Tower, My Willis Tower app. And through that app, as you were mentioning, people can get, tenants can receive notifications about what's going on with construction, what's the next big milestone I can be looking out for, what's the next elevator cab, that interior that has just been rehabbed, so I can go check that out. What of our restaurant tenants are opening, who's opening, when are they opening, and as part of that app experience, we'll integrate with a food delivery service, and that we'll be able to partner with our restaurant tenants, and everyone wants convenience. They want things now. This morning my Uber said it was going to take 6 minutes, and I was like, too long, I'll check Lyft. 2 minutes, okay, done. We just, there's a level of impatience there now. You expect everything just faster because technology starts to facilitate that happening. So as those consumer habits change, we start to see that tenants are willing and will be willing to pay the extra whatever, dollar something it is to get their food delivered so that they don't have to take the elevator or two downstairs to pick it up. They'll have it delivered to their space. So we're starting to think about it. And that was, to be honest, when we started this 2 years ago, and we started talking with different restaurateurs and building out this catalog space, we really hadn't thought about the delivery component or an app-based component at that time, because 2 years ago, it was like, well, of course, you just go downstairs, get your food, not a problem. And then we had tenants asking us, well, are there going to be delivery services? How's that going to work? So that those consumer habits are starting to change how we're looking at integrating with our app and the services that we provide.
What about where you've got a building, you've got a lot of different tenants? You might have 20, 30, even more tenants, all with different needs. How do you accommodate all that?
Well, beyond even just the different sizes of tenants, you know, in all these tall buildings, there are, in most cases, they're mixed uses, right? So some retail maybe at the base. In the tallest of buildings, you might have a broadcast business, or like at Willis, we have a broadcast business as well as the Skydeck business. And that's, you know, close to 2 million visitors a year going to that Skydeck. And that's a big volume of people on a daily basis who are coming into the building. So it does present a lot of challenges because we are first and foremost an office building. So we want to preserve that Class A experience for office tenants, but also be a welcoming place for the tourist traffic that we receive. And the way that we've managed that from an architectural and design perspective is working with Gensler. We have 2 office entries. The main one is on Wacker. The secondary one is on Franklin. But we see about 50-50 in terms of traffic of office people coming into those 2 entrances. With the new entrance of Jackson introduced, it will be interesting to see how that traffic flow changes. But one thing we did on the Wacker side of the building is when you come in at Wacker, because of the difference in elevation to Franklin to Wacker as it builds up for Lower Wacker Drive, is you enter at level 1.5. And we built a new deck into the building at the 2nd floor. So when you come in on Wacker, you have a choice when you're at 1.5, am I going to go up to the office lobby lounge area, or am I going to go down and connect with the 1st floor, which then weaves me over to the catalog space and to the Skydeck. So with the architecture and design, we tried to find a way to create that separation of users so that we create that elevated experience for our office tenants who don't necessarily want to be fighting to get to the elevator with, you know, the family of 4. So it does create challenges from kind of a circulation perspective at the base, but it's one that we love because it also creates that energy around the building that people really enjoy.
Thank you. We had a question over there, yeah.
Hi, this is Peyman Asghari-Nejad from Pan Partners. We know over the past 10 years with the digital revolutions, and we're going to the smart building and smart cities, and we're having all the BMS and BIM building information system in our tall buildings. I guess my question is for you as a developer and owner, are you creating like an intelligent platform, intelligent digital platform to gather all real data to have, for the futures?
Are you creating a digital platform for data and increasing use of data in the operation of tall buildings? All part of us creating a smart building.
Our occupants are asking for that. Our tenants are certainly doing so within their space. Yeah. And similar to the bar example, opening up 2 hours sooner, we know we're asking that of building owners and of developers to provide that, from statistics, data around use and utilization, which we started the conversation with, to attendance via elevator usage, who's going up and at what floors and at what times. So certainly we are seeing it more and more. I would say it's beginning. There are a few occupants that, again, do it on a per block of space basis, as they don't occupy typically the entire tall building. So it's at the cusp, or at the beginning of what you're asking about. It's been our experience.
That has not been at the core of our redevelopment program, although to Abe's point, there are certainly tenants within the building who are building more of that digital platform. I mean, we're looking at, in the new footprint of the building with the catalog space, building in some different technologies that help us to become smarter about understanding how people are utilizing that circulation space and how they're using our elevators. There's certainly a lot of data that we'll be looking to Otis to help us understand, really how we can maximize that customer experience and what we can change based on that. But it's not something that, on a broad scale, is at the core of our redevelopment program.
Tom, what about
I would just comment, I mean, there is and I think we all see there's just a ton of data available and a lot of useful data, and it's all about how we deliver that data, how we deliver our data to our customers, how we deliver it to our mechanics so they can fix elevator problems. I think it's not a problem of getting the data, it's how do we deliver it. And we're certainly spending a lot of time figuring out what our customers want and how do we deliver that data.
What's the next big game changer in terms of tall buildings satisfying emerging occupier needs, either from a developer's perspective, what do you think the next big thing is going to be, or from an occupier's perspective in terms of what their next big change in needs is going to be?
I think we're seeing it. We're seeing it, again, thinking in terms of what our occupants are asking for today, this catalog space. What we're seeing more and more, we've seen in buildings in New York, in Miami, and certainly here in Chicago, in the West Loop, for those who haven't been there. It's an opportunity for the tall building to deliver a community. And it's that flexibility, that adaptability of space, of restaurants. Typically, if you would have asked me 10 years ago, every building has their anchor white tablecloth restaurant and possibly an anchor quick service restaurant. And that's about it. But now we're building a space that has 13 kitchens. And we don't have the users yet. We have the kitchens. So whether it's a coffee shop, a breakfast spot, a chicken spot, Revival Food Hall, if for those of you who haven't gone, over at 125 South Clark is a great example of what we are now starting to see is a big driver for our occupants, is what convenience can buildings deliver to our tenants. Well, that's great. They can go down to the food hall or the catalog space and try out 10 or 12 different lunch variations, whether it's quick service, whether it's fast food or a white tablecloth. And we're seeing this in retrofits of traditional buildings, even in our own building right across the river here. We're seeing what was a small restaurant bar being converted into 3 different experiences. So I would say if you're looking at what the game changer is right now, what's a differentiator for those big buildings, it's building that sort of community space within your core infrastructure.
Kirsten?
I totally agree. I think that is the differentiating factor, and we talk about that a lot as a company as we look across our portfolio, not just at the tall buildings, but certainly we have the best opportunity in our tall buildings to do this, is that how, on a long-term basis as owners of real estate, can we continue to differentiate ourselves? And it's on helping our tenants co-create those community spaces. It's how do we make our spaces, our EQ office buildings, sticky? How do we get tenants to want to stay? And it's creating those connections, not just with the building, but with each other as tenants, and creating those B2B communities. I mean, I think that that's one of the reasons why early on the 1871 and some of the co-working spaces and WeWork, et cetera, were really successful because they really were the first ones pushing the envelope to say, not just is this a place for you to work, but guess what? We can pair you with mentors and potential resources for funding and things like that. And that made those places sticky, and that was a community that really thrived off of that. And that's something that I think is the differentiating factor, to Abe's point, going forward. And it's not just the physical space, but also what can we as landlords help provide to our tenants to create that community amongst themselves. So we've done a couple of specific things at Willis that have really gone over well with our existing tenants, and that we're using as recruiting tools. We have a regular Tower Talks series where we, introduce different topics of interest to our tenants, and we do a quarterly, whether it be a lunch or an after-work event, through that series, and then those tenants get to know each other, people who are interested in those different things. People who are subscribers to the app, we have app user-only bourbon tastings and things like that to make this large building, these 15,000 employees, to make that smaller, to create a community within that. And then we just launched our Women of Willis network, which is truly the only one that I have heard of, and again, that opportunity that we have in the scale that we have to create a community within that large space.
Tom, in your world, what's the next big game changer?
I think it's the same theme that they're talking about. It's how do we're no longer delivering elevator systems, but it's really an integrated system into the building. And so, an example would be that a couple years ago, we thought everybody would want an elevator app to call their building, and it would be great to download an Otis elevator app, but that's not the case. We need to be part of the building, part of a building app, part of the building experience. And so, sure, there are a lot of technologies coming, but to me, it's all about being part of this partnership in a building.
Nancy?
So, I obviously agree with them about, creating the experience. It is all about the human experience. But one of the things that we need to solve is how people move vertically, not just elevators, but how, they integrate with each other if they are on multiple floors. So I think that would be helpful, but it's also about the adaptability of an existing space. How quickly can it be reconfigured? Mm-hmm. What materials are we using that will allow us to reconfigure something quickly? Mm-hmm. I did talk to a developer friend of mine, and they said, I'd like to be rid of all columns. If we could do that, that would be great. That would be a game changer. So
we'll finish on that. The next big game changer is no columns.
No columns. Okay. Perfect.
Unless there are any other burning questions, there is another burning question. I think we've got time for one or two more, perhaps.
Hello, I'm Sushant Varpe from Mumbai, architect, hobbyist contractor. Observation deck is completely untapped market in India. So what are the challenges in terms of security, financially or maintenance-wise?
Yeah.
That's the question.
It's 18 years since 9/11. What are
the challenges
issues?
From a security perspective, or just more broadly within the building?
Services-wise, design-wise, financial perspective, why it is not tapped yet?
Financial security.
Not financially, is it viable option? Is it in tall buildings?
To have an
How can you make
observation
tall
deck.
buildings secure but viable as well?
And specifically around observation decks. Yeah. Sure. The observation deck model at Willis, because Willis has been as Sears Tower, the tallest building in the U.S. for so many years. We have a really thriving observation deck business. So it's the Sky Deck. We introduced the Ledge, which are 4 glass boxes that extend from the west side of the building, and you can look all the way down. And it truly still makes my heart flutter, and I've done it 1,000 times. It is an amazing business. It is incredible to me the number of people who come from around the country, around the world, and who want to say that they've done this. This is on their bucket list. They want to do it. There are more towers now, especially new towers, that are incorporating observation decks as part of their business model. Because it is, if you can get people to come, and if your marketing is strong enough and your story is strong enough, it's a compelling business because your largest costs are your labor. You get people up, and it's labor costs. So we are, as part of the redevelopment, we are improving the whole Skydeck experience, both on the lower level as you approach, as well as once you go up in the observation deck elevators to the top floor on 103. We're working on improving that experience, but it's incredible. It was marathon weekend 2 or 3 weekends ago, Columbus Day weekend, so long holiday weekend. That Monday we had 2.5-hour waits at the Skydeck because the weather had been kind of iffy over the weekend, so there's always pent-up demand if that happens. So that Monday, it was so cool walking around Catalog and seeing and hearing 15 different languages being spoken of all these different people who flew in to be a part of the marathon experience and said, you know what else I have to do when I'm in Chicago? I've got to go visit Skydeck. I've got to go see Willis Tower. And so it's a really compelling and important part of our ownership of the building and really wanting to make that a continued valuable experience for people and to attract more locals to come back to.
Okay, so this whole subject is a really, really critical one. It's going to feature even more prominently in future events, but I'm afraid we've run out of time today because we do want to allow time for the coffee break for discussions, which is sponsored by Tonjoy Architectural Design Group, by the way. 2 points of order, just to reinforce what Anthony said, still tickets for tonight's dinner and for the follow-on programs tomorrow and beyond. But can you join me in putting your hands together for our panelists for their time? Thank you.